You're lying on a straw mattress. It's dark. Something is moving in the thatch above your head, and you can hear your entire family breathing 3 feet away. You have a fever. And the only question that matters, the question that decides whether you see next week, was answered years ago on the day you were born. Because in the Middle Ages, how you die isn't a mystery, it's a schedule. And your class handed it to you at birth. Peasant, townsman, noble, priest. 4 different lives, 4 completely different deaths. And here's the part nobody tells you. The safest looking option on that list is a trap. By the end of this video, you'll know which class you'd want. And it's probably not the one you're thinking of right now. But before we sort you into a class, there's a gate everyone has to pass through first. And most of the dying happens right here. Childhood. It doesn't matter if your father is a plowman or a duke. The first 5 years of your life are the most dangerous thing you will ever do. Historians estimate that somewhere around 1/4 to 1/3 of medieval children died before their 5th birthday, and in bad times and bad places, roughly half didn't reach adulthood. Dysentery, smallpox, measles, fevers nobody had a name for. A newborn in the Middle Ages was, statistically, a coin flip with a face. This is why medieval life expectancy numbers sound so grim. You've heard people say medieval folks died at 30. They didn't. The average is 30 because the graveyards were full of infants dragging the number down. If you survived childhood, you had a real shot at 50, 60, sometimes more. The famous averages aren't a picture of adults dropping dead at 30. They're a picture of children who never got to be adults at all, so congratulations. You made it to 15. Now the dice roll that actually shapes your death. What was your father? Let's start where about 9 out of 10 people started. You're a peasant. Good news first, because there isn't much of it. Nobody important wants to kill you. You're not worth ransoming. You're not worth assassinating. And wars are mostly a thing that happens to your crops rather than to you. Your killers are quieter than that. Your first killer is the sky. Your entire existence runs on one variable, the harvest. And you have no savings, no imports, and no plan B. In the spring of 1315, it started raining across northern Europe and essentially didn't stop. The crops rotted in the fields. Then it happened again the next year. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 killed somewhere around 10 to 15% of the population in the affected regions. 1 person in 10 gone. And the overwhelming majority of them were peasants. Chroniclers from those years describe people eating seed grain, eating the plow animals, and, in the worst accounts, worse things than that. The nobles were hungry those years. The peasants were dying. Same weather, different funerals. Your second killer is your job. We have the coroner's rolls from medieval England, actual death investigations written down, and peasant deaths read like a workplace safety seminar from hell. Drowned in a ditch, drowned in a well, crushed by a cart, kicked by a horse, fell from a barn, gored by someone's pig. There were no weekends off from the thing trying to kill you, because the thing trying to kill you was Tuesday, and your third killer is water and everything in it. Typhoid, dysentery, worms. The everyday infections that a single course of antibiotics would erase today. Here's the number to keep. On one English manor, Halesowen, records from around the 14th century suggest the better-off peasants lived to around 50 on average, the poorer tenants around 40. The landless cottagers at the bottom, around 30. Read that again. Within the peasantry alone, the gap between the top and the bottom was 20 years of life. Poverty wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a countdown. So fine, the countryside is a death trap. You'll move to town, learn a trade, get ahead. Cities are the future. The cities would like a word. A medieval town solves your famine problem and replaces it with 2 new ones. The first is disease. Thousands of people, their animals, and their waste, packed inside a wall, drinking from the same water the tanners and butchers are dumping into. Towns were so lethal that most of them couldn't sustain their own populations. They only kept their numbers up by importing a steady stream of fresh peasants to replace the ones the town was quietly burying. The second problem is other people. Everyone in a medieval town carries a knife. Everyone drinks ale, partly because it's safer than the water, which tells you a lot about the water. And there are no police. If you witness a crime, the law expects you to literally chase the criminal yourself while screaming. This system, incredibly, was called the hue and cry, and it worked about as well as you'd expect. Researchers at Cambridge mapped hundreds of medieval murders from actual coroners' inquests, and the numbers are spectacular. Late medieval Oxford had a homicide rate they estimate at 60 to 75 per 100,000 people per year, roughly 50 times the rate of a modern English city. And the deadliest group in the deadliest city? Students. About 3/4 of Oxford's known killers, and its victims, were classified as clericus, university men, 14 to 21 years old, all male, armed, and drunk. In 1298, a tavern argument on Oxford High Street escalated into a street battle with swords and battle-axes, over a disagreement at a bar. The single most dangerous demographic in medieval England was, statistically, the college student, which may be the most relatable fact in this entire video. So the country starves you and the town stabs you. Obviously, the answer is to be born rich. Castle walls, full pantry, servants, meat every day. The nobility must be the safe pick. This is where the whole picture turns inside out. A study of English ducal families, the very top of the aristocracy, between 1330 and 1479, found an average life expectancy of roughly 24 years. 24. Lower than the poorest cottagers scraping by at the bottom of Hellzauen. The best fed, best housed, best protected people in the kingdom were dying younger than the peasants they ruled, because the nobility had a job too, and the job was violence. That's the entire deal of being a noble. You hold your land in exchange for fighting. Your armor is excellent, and it's strapped to a target. In battle, you might be spared for ransom. A live lord is worth a fortune, a dead one is worth his boots. But might is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. And in a rout or a civil war, or on the wrong end of a treason verdict, the armor just means you die tired. During the Wars of the Roses, England's noble families fed themselves into battles and executions for 3 decades, and entire bloodlines simply stopped. And when there was no war, the nobles kept in practice by nearly killing each other for fun. Early tournaments weren't the polite jousting of the movies. They were mock battles with real weapons. In one German chronicle from 1241 records, around 80 knights and squires dying at a single tournament. The church banned them repeatedly. It didn't take, because the one thing medieval nobles feared more than death was boredom. Even kings weren't safe. In 1559, King Henry II of France took a splinter of shattered lance through the visor at a celebratory joust. A reminder that the sport stayed lethal right to the end of the era and beyond. And if you were a noble woman, your battlefield was the birthing chamber. Every single birth carried a real chance of killing you. Most estimates put it around 1% or a bit more per delivery, which sounds small until you remember a noble woman's job was to produce heirs again and again. A dozen rolls of that dice across a lifetime. Charlemagne's wife, Hildegard, bore 9 children and was dead at 25. He lived past 65. The risk didn't care about your title. It compounded, so the peasants starve, the townsfolk sicken and stab, and the nobles butcher each other on schedule. Which leaves one class. The clever pick. The church. Guaranteed food, stone walls, no battlefield, no childbirth, and you're literally employed by God. If this were a strategy game, monk is the obvious meta. And for a long time, it worked. Studies of well-fed monastic communities show monks who survived to adulthood often living into genuine old age. The church was the one ladder a peasant's son could actually climb, and the view from the top was long life and soft hands. Then 1347 happened, and the strategy detonated. The Black Death arrived and killed, by most estimates, somewhere between a third and half of Europe over about 4 years, and it did not treat the classes equally, just not in the direction you'd assume. The English parish clergy died at a rate of roughly 40 to 45%, in some dioceses closer to half, higher than many estimates for the general population, because a priest's job was to sit at the deathbed of every plague victim in the parish and administer last rites, breath to breath. The most protected men in Europe had accidentally taken the most exposed job in it, and the monasteries, those safe stone boxes full of men sharing food, air, and a dormitory, were perfect plague incubators. Some houses were wiped out to the last monk, Sanctuary, it turned out, was just quarantine with the sick already inside. The nobles did better, their manors were spread out, and they could simply leave, but better meant a mortality rate among the crown's own landholders of around 23%. Even at the very top, the plague killed roughly 1 in 4. The peasants packed in their villages with nowhere to run died in numbers we can barely verify because in some places there was no one left to write them down. The plague didn't erase the class system. It just proved the class system was a set of different doors into the same room. So let's do the final accounting. If you're a peasant, hunger and infection get you slowly on a schedule set by the weather. If you're a townsman, the city's water or the city's knives get you, and the odds spike every Thursday night near a tavern. If you're a nobleman, other noblemen get you, probably before your 25th birthday, possibly at a party. If you're a noble woman, the next heir might get you on the way out. And if you're a priest, your safety lasts exactly as long as nobody needs you. And the whole world is about to need you at once. There is no safe class in the Middle Ages. There are only different appointments, and here's the thing to sit with. You, watching this, will most likely die of heart disease or cancer somewhere in your 70s or 80s. Diseases of living long enough to get them. Every class in the medieval world would have looked at your death certificate and read it as a fantasy of unimaginable luxury. Dying old in a bed of nothing anyone did to you. The Middle Ages had a class system for everything. Land, law, food. Even the clothes you were allowed to wear, turns out it had one for dying too. The only real upgrade in 700 years is that now, the schedule doesn't come with your birth certificate. Mostly.